Thank you, Dr. Joy. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today, and it's so great to see all of you that have joined. This is a topic that I really love talking about. So let's go ahead and dive in. First question for you all. I'm going to skip back to that. What does it mean to thrive? And in the dictionary, the definition is to grow vigorously or to flourish, or to progress toward or realize a goal despite or because of circumstances. And I really loved this quote, that resilience is accepting your new reality, even if it's less good than the one you had before. You can fight it. You can do nothing but scream about what you've lost, or you can accept that and try to put together something that's good. And I think I'm probably safe to assume that we have all experienced some major changes in our lives, even within the past year, that we've all had some ups and downs, and that resilience is one of those things that maybe we don't think about, oh, am I resilient today? But it's something that will help us get through those difficult times. So a question for you, this is just for you to think about for a moment. Where will you be in 1 to 3 years if nothing changes with your stress? So just taking note of where you are right now with your stress. And if that continues, what will life look like in 1 to 3 years? And how confident do you feel in changing your stress levels? So let's look at this on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 meaning you are crashing and burning, and you do not feel like you could affect your stress levels at all. 10 meaning you are doing super awesome. So maybe grab a piece of paper or something else where you can put this down. 1 to 10, write it down. How confident do you feel that you can change your levels of stress, that you have the skills to do so? Oh, it's good that everybody can hear. Okay, let me know if there's any other issues arise. And I know that the ding is popping up for messages, so I apologize for that. I'm not quite sure how to turn it off. So let's get into your Thrivebox, your toolbox of resilience. So I like to call these the 5 C's of resilience. So first one, C number 1 is coherence. And coherence is the feeling that all things will work out as well as can reasonably be expected. 20% of us are born optimistic, but 80% of us need to learn optimism. And we can do it. We can learn how to be optimistic. So an important part of cultivating optimism is seeing difficult times as temporary and having hope that things will improve. And I like to call this the law of impermanence, that nothing is permanent. If things are good, they're going to change. And if things are bad, they will also change eventually. And it's just kind of that cycle. And seeing that we need to be realistic, we need to see things as they really are and not worse than they really are. I heard this term in a TED Talk I watched a couple years ago, and the TED Talk was called A Love Letter to Realism in a Time of Grief. And optimistic realism is kind of my new mantra here. Another part of this is looking at our language and avoiding using always and never, which those words are the antithesis of optimism. It's black and white thinking. It's all or nothing thinking. And even if you fail at something 40% of the time, that means you're winning 60% of the time. So something to think about. And I just realized that some of my animations are not working in this. So There was a quote here that said, always and never are two words you should always remember to never use. So just remember that. So in each one of these, we'll talk about a healing principle and a healing behavior. And the behavior is the one that we can take action on. So our C number 1 of coherence is cultivating optimism. So C number 2 is commitment. And commitment in this sense is believing in the importance and meaningfulness of your experiences and being curious about what's happening around you. Making a positive difference to an ideal greater than yourself. So let's take a minute to do a quick little activity. So I want you, and you're probably in a room that's familiar to you, so that means it's kind of easier to cheat. But wherever you are, look around the room and find things that are the color blue. I'll give you a second to do that. Look around. What is the color blue? Okay. Now close your eyes and think to yourself, what did you see that was the color blue? Now keep your eyes closed. And what did you see that was the color green? Can you even remember anything that was green? That's a little harder because you weren't looking for it. So go ahead and open your eyes and look around and see the green and the blue things. But the point is you were not looking for what was green. And we tend to really only see what we're looking for. So if we're looking for good, that's what we'll see. If we're finding negativity in our lives, it's important to shift our focus and look for the positive. One way we can do that is by practicing gratitude. So our brains are really adapted for survival, to find those dangers in order to fight or flight. I mean, that's how we evolved, is looking for the dangers so that we could move away from them. And so we see the negative before we see the positive. So sometimes you have to be intentional about shifting your focus to look for the positive. And then as we look for those things, our true purpose will be revealed. We'll be able to find what's important to us. The important part of this is finding a way to bring it to the forefront of your mind. So either write it down, say it out loud, share it with a friend, or just think about it and train your brain to look for the positive. When we used to work in the office, I would use my commute home as my trigger to look for the positive, because I like to look for beauty in nature. And so I always remember at certain stoplights, I would look around and look at the mountains and the trees. And that was one of my ways for shifting my focus to look for the positive. So you find the way that works for you to look for that. So number 3, our C number 3 is challenge. And challenge in this sense means the ability to see change as an opportunity rather than a threat. Something that creates growth, creativity, and excitement. And when we look at stress, most of us label stress as bad. And that's the first mistake we make. And that labeling creates feelings of helplessness, because we immediately go, stress, bad equals I can't do anything about it. But there really are two kinds of stress. And our perception, and if my animation popped up, it would pop up right under stress that says perception. But our perception of stress is what can make or break us. So there's really two parts here. So eustress is considered good stress. It is stress that, if we look at it with a positive light and with a growth mindset, like Carol Dweck has talked a lot about, or a stress is enhancing mindset, which comes from Dr. Alia Crum. We can use that challenge as a springboard for growth and an opportunity for improving our abilities to reach our full potential. We really have to differentiate if it's eustress or distress. Because if it's eustress, we can improve, we can adapt and grow. I mean, that's how any of us get better at anything, is by pushing ourselves. Like a new job, or we're asked to give a presentation, or we're working on a new project. You know, even when you look at babies, like that's how they learn how to walk. And we really need to differentiate if it's eustress or distress. Now, distress, if it really is distress, if it's something that caused trauma, and that is definitely a real thing, then we've got to find a way to work through it, to process it and heal from it. So the first part is determining if it's eustress or distress, and then we either adapt and grow, or we process and heal. And so one of the ways to work through distress is write down your deepest feelings. Explore why it upsets you and what you can really do about it. And then you identify how to improve or transform as a result of that trauma. And maybe it's setting boundaries in your life. Maybe it's acknowledging your own strengths and finding purpose through that trauma. So this one's a really important one, that our perception of stress is one of our ways that we can create more resilience and that growth mindset of moving forward and learning from it. So our C number 4 is connection. And connection has to do with our social connections. The most vulnerable people who are those who are socially isolated, and they have about a 10 times increased risk of depression. So connection is having a social network that helps us cope with stress. One of my favorite studies is the Harvard Happiness Study. And for over 75 years, they have been following hundreds and hundreds of people from all walks of life. They started in their teens and followed them throughout their entire lifespan. And it didn't matter, you know, what their job was, what their socioeconomic status was. They followed them to determine what really determines happiness. And they found that good relationships keep us happier and healthier, and that a lack of social relationships rivals risk factors such as high blood pressure, cholesterol, obesity, and low physical activity. And it's not the number of friends that you have, it's the quality of your close relationships. And they found even couples that bickered, as long as they knew they could count on each other, that was considered a close relationship. So when these subjects were studied in their 80s, the researchers went back and looked at when they were in their 50s for predictable risk factors for happiness. And relationships played the biggest role. And we're social beings. But just because you're an introvert doesn't mean you don't need some kind of strong connection. You find your fit, whether or not it's social groups or a few friends or a close family member or even a pet. But the thing is relationships, they take effort, especially the most important ones. And just take a moment to examine if you've become complacent at all in those relationships that matter the most to you. And it often takes a level of vulnerability, which can really be uncomfortable at times, to truly connect with someone. And sometimes forgiveness is even involved. And vulnerability is one of those topics that, if you know Brene Brown, look into her information if you want to study a little more about vulnerability and empathy, because those are important parts of connection. But you can, your pet could be your great connection if you want. There's lots of ways, but it does take some effort for the ones that really, really matter. So C number 5 is control. And control has to do with responsibility for your own actions and the belief that your actions will have the desired outcome. And this is the ability to be in the present moment and accept what's happening without controlling external factors. So the things that you don't have control over, because you can only control yourself. And sometimes that's really hard when we know how a situation would end up better if you could control it, but we can't do that. So the healing behavior for control is being present. And that has a lot to do with mindfulness. Mindfulness meditation is purposely focusing your awareness on the present without judging it as good or bad. And this allows us to release that frenzy of multitasking that often happens when we have that feeling of loss of control start to rise to the surface. Distractions will arise, they always do, but the goal is to just gently notice them without judging. We are so good at labeling things as good or bad, and then bringing ourselves back to the present. We really can't multitask. We can really only focus on one thing at a time, and that's when we start to lose that feeling of control. And when it comes to actual mindfulness meditation, it can be really informal just throughout the day, just stopping and taking a moment or taking a few deep breaths or taking a minute of breathing. Or it can be more formal. You actually set aside time, you calendar it, and you make it happen. I like just using like gentle reminders, certain triggers in the day. But science has shown that just 10 minutes a day for 5 days causes actual physical changes in your brain. It creates better synapses and patterns. So let's just take like 1 minute, maybe even less, like 30 seconds we're going to take for mindfulness. So go ahead and find yourself in a tall seated position so that you can be relaxed but alert at the same time, and let your feet rest on the floor, let your hands rest in your lap, and then if you're comfortable with it, just go ahead and close your eyes. We're going to do a quick check-in here. So take away all the screens, take away that sight, start to notice how you're feeling in this moment. How do you feel physically, or how do you feel mentally right now? And the key is that we're not judging, we are just noticing. If you're feeling stressed, that's fine. You just say it to yourself, but then you release it. We're not saying it's good or bad. Now start to focus a little more on your breath. Inhaling and exhaling through the nose. And see if you can lengthen your breath a little bit. Just allow yourself to release tension as you exhale. And if any thoughts about the past or the future start to pop in, you just refocus on your breath so you can be present in this moment. This is the only moment you are alive in, is this one right now. So now go ahead and start to bring yourself back. Go ahead and add a little movement to fingers and toes. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So that was a really simple mindfulness practice, very simple exercise that you can use anytime during the day. So if you're starting to feel that out of control feeling, that's a great way to take a break. And literally like 1 minute, it will help you refocus. So So those are our 5 C's. There's one more little bitty thing I wanted to bring up, throwing in a plug for physical activity. Just because one of the most effective treatments for anxiety and depression is physical activity. Research has shown that physical activity is just as effective as medication, and we get a lot more positive side effects from physical activity. So that could be our 6th C is physical activity. But just as a quick review, so I noticed that none of my, nothing showed up in this slide here. So we're going to go back and quickly review. Our first C is coherence, and our behavior is to cultivate optimism. Our second C was commitment, and our behavior is to shift our focus. And you can think of the green and the blue activity, like we are going to see what we look for. Our third C is challenge, and our healing behavior is, it says process difficult feelings here, but the first part of it is to differentiate between eustress and distress, because most of the stress in our lives really is good stress that we can learn from. And then our fourth C was connection. This is our social engagement, having people we can count on, and creating good relationships and that they take effort. And then our fifth C was control. And this is the things we can control, creating space in our lives by being present. And then that extra little C I added there, which is physical activity. So now that we have reviewed everything, I want to ask you this question again. This is the same question I asked at the beginning. How confident do you feel in changing the levels of stress in your life? And maybe it's the same as at the beginning, or maybe you've learned a few skills that you feel like you can apply. Because our life is really hills and valleys, but so are our personalities, and we all fall down. And these skills are meant to teach us how to get back up so that we can live healthy and fulfilling lives, or at least still find happiness amidst our trials, our health challenges, our stresses. And maybe all of these will work for you, or maybe just one will. You get to experiment and find out which one feels authentic to you, that supports your personality and moves you closer to your values and your purpose. So thank you all for joining today. Are there any questions or comments? I'd also be interested to know if your stress level, your scale of 1 to 10 changed between the first time I asked and the second time I asked. So feel free to use the chat.
Well, Cami, this is Liz. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but I'm happy to share that I love these mindful moments, and I'm a convert when it comes to mindfulness in the last year and a half, and I definitely noticed that my shoulders felt a little less tighter, and my mind a little bit more relaxed. So thank you for kind of guiding us through that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm seeing some comments in the chat that some people's numbers changed from the beginning to the end, and that they feel a little more confident in tackling stress in their lives. That's so great to hear. Okay, well, if there's no questions, I think we can wrap up then.
All right. Well, thanks again, Cami. We always appreciate your contributions. Patty put in the chat that our next webinar is actually on Wednesday, June 2nd. We'll be hearing from, I think it's Jessica LaRoche, who will be talking about supplements in sports. And then I had the date wrong for the interview with an athlete. That'll be June 16th with Dr. Harrison. So please join us in June. Thanks, everybody, for joining today for the Resilience Thrivebox. And yes, these webinars are recorded, and they will be uploaded to our Healthy at Home website. Maybe just some passing comments, if you wouldn't mind, Cami. I know that some people are using some mindfulness apps on their phones as a way to kind of guide them. Do you have any recommendations there?
Yes, I do. And I totally lost the name of it, and I use it all the time. So I'm looking. Oh, it's the Calm app.
Calm, yes.
Calm app is my favorite mindfulness app. They have like sleep stories and music and mindfulness meditations, and yeah, I really love the Calm app. I've heard Headspace is good too, but I'm particular to Calm.
Yes, I'm a Headspace gal. I can see in the chat people endorsing both Calm and Headspace. And of course, Headspace is available without charge, I believe, to Intermountain caregivers. So that's a nice advantage for the caregivers who have joined the webinar today. So it could be a really nice guide to get people started.
And how would people find that free version then for Headspace?
Well, that's a really good question. I think I saw it in the Caregiver Daily Brief months and months ago. So perhaps, Cami, since you're with the Caregiver LiveWell team, you could check in with Lindsay or Michelle and see how people can access that.
Yes, I'd be happy to find that out. That's great information. So we'll do a little research on that.
Okay, well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And oh, actually, Chris Thompson just said the info was in the brief, the daily brief today, or caregiver brief, I guess we're calling it. So check your email for the caregiver brief, and it's in there. So, all right, you guys. Well, thanks again. Thanks, Cami. Everybody have a great evening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.